Sometimes the things that make us different are the things that make us strong. Unknown.
Join me as we jump into the Autism Navigation Pod. Yes, we made it. It's a new podcast, the Autism Navigation Pod. I'm Jesse Yarger, your host. This podcast is for the listeners. It's all about autism. And season 1, we're going to be talking to different guests about different aspects of autism. We're going to start with diagnoses, and we're going to be going through all the way through graduation of treatment. So I'm very excited to finally get this up and running. A few quick thank yous before we get started with our first guest. First of all, Noah Rasmussen is the world's best producer, I think. He is so flexible. He's so talented. And really, he has navigated through quite a few different changes to the podcast, even before episode 1 of season 1. So thank you, Noah. Could not have done this without you. I also want to thank our guests for season 1. They were so generous with their time and their information, their knowledge. None of them were paid. They all volunteered to do this. So a huge thank you to them. None of this would be possible without them either. And last and mostly the listeners. This podcast is going to be guided by you. And I think it's going to be really important to get feedback from the listeners. And we want to know what is important to you. What should we dive into? What information or misinformation about autism should we talk about on this podcast? If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if there's things that you want to know about autism that you think would be helpful for all of our listeners, we do have an email address. It's autismnavigationpod@outlook.com. We're so excited to get started. So without further ado, what prompted you to seek out an autism diagnosis or evaluation for, and you can talk about Jared or Lily or both. So I'll just kind of let you take it away.
So I think with Jareth, like it started really early on. When he was a baby, I had started working from home prior to him being born, and so I was with him a lot. And once he was old enough, he took to holding my ear to sleep, and he would not go to sleep unless he was holding my ear. He liked having his own ear held, but he really that was one of those sensory things. He had to be holding an ear, preferably mine, sometimes my oldest son's. And then when he started making sounds and forming words, that was a big thing for us too, because he would sit there and for hours just say dad, 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 as loud as he could. And he would just say it over and over again for long, huge amounts of time. Is there anything earlier on that you saw?
Well, once he did start really talking, he went straight from just single words to full sentences.
Yeah.
We couldn't get him. We would try to get him to say a couple of words here and there, or he didn't really talk a lot. And then he just started full sentences that were well beyond what he should have been speaking. So that was kind of a clue for us too, that he didn't talk for so long. And when he did start talking, his vocabulary was incredible.
And so once we noticed all of those signs, we started thinking about what was going on, because along with all of that, he would get to a point, we had a baby gate to keep him from getting in the kitchen. As soon as he was tall enough to try and reach over that gate, he would go in and he'd snap the gate so it would open up, and then he'd run away. And I'd put the gate back up and he'd snap it and run away. And we would do that back and forth all the time. Another thing was his toys in his room. He would not let his toys be organized and put away. Sham and I would spend an hour cleaning his room, putting everything away, making it nice. 15 minutes later, he was in his room, dumping everything into a gigantic pile right in the middle of the room. on a near constant basis. And along with that, there were also aggressive behaviors that came. He would get very frustrated very easily. He would scream, he would hit, he would throw things, and he would try to just do everything he could to hurt or just really violent behavior. I mean, he had a right hook that was hard for me to get over. And so once he turned 3, because we had talked to some family members and people who kind of dealt with children like this before, and they suggested we get him tested, but that a lot of places would not test until they were older. So we waited until he was 3 and had him tested for that, and that's kind of what led to all of that. Was just all of these signs that they weren't small signs, they weren't small things at all for us. They were huge.
We're so lucky to have Paula with us for our first episode. She has 2 master's degrees. One is in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Mind, Brain, and Education. Paula's second master's degree is from the University of Utah in psychology, and she's been conducting autism evaluations since 2018. In her spare time, she enjoys being a grandmother of 3. Paula, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah. So Paula, today, as you know, we're going to be talking about the early signs of autism and maybe some of the processes that families can go through or things that they can look for to know if they should seek out a formal autism evaluation. So we'll just kind of jump right in. What are some of the most common signs or things that should maybe be focused on by families?
Typically, some signs of it will emerge between the age of 1 and 2. Usually parents will show some kind of concern before their second birthday, but there is also late onset kiddos that, don't show signs until like after 24 months, and then they can be subtle signs. So, but the type of symptoms parents should be looking for would be like a regression in their progress. So if they were progressing really well and then all of a sudden they stopped for a while, so they either plateau or they can even go backwards and have less communication skills, less vocabulary, and then they'll move forward again and eventually, but they'll have a period of regression or plateauing. That's a common sign between like 12 and 24 months. They usually have poor eye contact. If you look at them in the eyes, they're going to look away. A lot of them do stimming type behaviors, and you can even see this in babies sometimes where if they do the same behavior repetitively, a body movement, or it could be a vocal squeal repeatedly, or just they repeat echolalia type. Their language develops a little differently, and they'll mimic words a lot of the time. There's also typically a lot of sensory issues, but that's not, like, a lot of people have a misconception that if you have sensory issues, then you have autism. That's not true. So, but it's just there's a high percentage of those who with autism that have sensory issues. So, in a young child, I would say for visual, they might stare at things like lights for a long time or a fan moving, or get obsessed with certain visual things, or they're aversive to things that have to do with visual stuff. Or textures are very commonly a problem. Kids don't like rough textures on their skin, and some like pressure, some do not, to calm down. There's all kinds of sensory issues as far as taste and smell, and they don't typically like to be touched a lot, but some do. So that's not an every kid thing. They're typically poor sleepers. That doesn't have to be the case, but Many of them struggle with sleep. And as they begin to walk, they'll use their mom's hand to kind of show them how to do things instead of talking and telling them. They also don't really show, they don't like to, like if they're playing something, they don't typically want someone to interact with them. They like to kind of do it their way. And if you interact with them, they might turn away from you. What else?
So really quickly, it sounds like one point that I really want to kind of drive home. It sounds like all of these are things that are common that could happen, but aren't necessarily surefire things, or there's not like a specific thing that happens or thing that a child does that makes you think this child definitely has autism or this child definitely does not have autism. Is that accurate?
There's got to be a few things you can't, and each child's different. There's not one set way that it's going to present, just like there's no one neurotypical child that's the same. They're all different in how they present, but over time you can see a combination of some of these things I've talked about. They also they're not very affectionate, and they don't like to use gestures. Like when we talk, we tend to just use our hands or just know socially ways to interact with gesturing, and they don't have an interest in that. And it might be due to their lack of, there tends to be a lack of empathy in children with autism, and their facial expressions tend to be pretty flat. They don't get like really, they could get really excited face or a really mad face, but that's due to, them being upset or super happy. But when you're interacting with them, they don't really acknowledge you with a facial expression. And a real important point is that these kiddos will perseverate or have rigid thinking, and they can become easily upset if things don't go as their mind wants it to. I've had it explained to me that those with autism, they think a certain way, and when they're young, they think everybody else thinks like they do. And so they get really frustrated when everybody's not doing things the way they are doing them, because they're like, why isn't everybody on page 9? And they are very confident and know that they're doing it right or doing things right, and they don't want you to mess with it. They don't want you to touch it or move it around. They know how it's supposed to be, and leave it alone. But in really young kids, you might just see like a child pull away or just not really be cuddly. So early on, you kind of have to see a combination of things before you really get concerned. But you do want to catch it in time so that they have the best shot of doing well developmentally.
Paula, one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier was some of the stimming behaviors. I think the hallmark that I think most of us really kind of think about is hand flapping. Are there other common, like physical, you mentioned vocal stim. Are there other common things that the parents could kind of keep an eye out for that maybe would be above and beyond what we would expect from a child who doesn't have autism?
Yeah, I would say the main thing is it would need to be consistent and frequent in order for it to really be stemming, because some parents will say, oh, my child bangs their head, or my child flaps their hands, or my child does this. But if they're not doing it for like a long time every day, then that's not stemming. And so but there can be they can come up with all kinds of things. Like a lot of times you'll see they'll move their fingers just differently than we do. And they also can pick, scan, can be it's like repetitive bodily behaviors. You'll see a lot that just allow them to calm down, jumping up and down, doing things just repetitively with their body. And so there can be, I've seen a variety of things and then I'll look back like a baby videos, and you'll even see it on the baby videos, like the baby in the high chair just swinging his head back and forth forever. And you think, well, that's normal. That's what babies do. But if that baby does it for a long time every day and it seems to calm him down, then then you're on to something.
One of the things about autism, it's so varied. It presents so differently in every single kid, at least that I've worked with. Are there any myths, misconceptions? It can be so hard to get accurate information. I think related to autism. What would you like maybe caution people who are considering getting a diagnosis, or maybe having like WebMD diagnoses?
Yeah, Don't go to Google. Look at like peer-reviewed articles if you're gonna get on a computer. But there is a lot of upset with these children because they're rigid in their thinking, but it's not an emotional disorder. And something that you can't have other disorders with autism, and that's not true either, because a lot of times children will have the sensory processing or ADHD or other comorbidities and or OCD type behaviors, and that's very common, and that can go under the umbrella of autism once a child's diagnosed, because anxiety is always there, especially socially. So, but there's also some people that think girls and boys are the same, but girls present a little different than boys and less common than boys. However, I think part of that reason is all the studies and research has been focused on boys and males, and we're finding out that girls present differently. So I'm assuming more girls will be diagnosed now that people are getting a better understanding of the differences. So those are the common ones I'm aware of.
I think it's just so important to be knowledgeable, right? And I really like your suggestion about peer-reviewed articles. I know they can be a little dense and a little bit of a boring read at times, but it can be, I think, just so useful to have that resource. One of the other things I wanted to kind of have you talk about is when do families seek out an autism evaluation?
Well, it kind of varies. I mean, I've seen them from 15 months up to adulthood, before they some are adults before they come in and say, I think I have autism. And so it's when you become aware of it and when you become aware of the symptoms, and so that can vary, but they could start showing signs very young by 1, but you're going to get a more consistent diagnosis if you wait till they're like 2, but the research does show that even after, if you wait till 2 or close to 2, they do stay stable, stable diagnosis in like 84 to 100% of them. So it's pretty accurate by the age of 2.
Great.
So it depends on the progression of it.
Yeah, I know in my experience, I've talked to a few families who were kind of on the fence about whether or not to seek out an autism evaluation. Is there a downside from your professional opinion, either socially for families, or I know there's concerns at times about like a stigma? hasn't been my experience, but I wanted to kind of see, like, was there any reason, like maybe a family uh, would be justified in not seeking out an evaluation if they're concerned about autism?
I don't know if they're justified, but there are still some people who feel like autism is, got a stigma to it, but that is getting very much washed away recently with all the recent research and all the amazing things that high functioning autistic people do. They're amazing brains, and they do so much good for us and our world because of their amazing strengths. So they'll have strengths and weaknesses, but if you channel their strengths, man, they are awesome
Yeah,
workers.
I've been so impressed with autism advocacy groups, just how tight knit I've seen autism communities be, parent support groups. It's been a really cool development over, I would say, like the last, what, 5, 6, 7 years. It's been really cool to see, and it just seems, I think even other kids in schools are very aware and just
Yep.
becoming much more inclusive than maybe when you and I were children.
Yeah. Yep. And I bet a lot of, the parents that might be scared or be unsure of what to do, getting educated about it will make you feel a lot better, because the more knowledge everybody has, they treat the people with autism with respect and notice their limitations and don't tease them for it or bully them or whatever, because their brain developed different. They had no control over that. So people start to understand the more knowledge is spread.
Awesome. So when, let's say, family goes through, they see some signs, they're wanting to seek out an evaluation, is there anything that they should have prepared or anything that they should maybe jot down before calling a provider to seek out an autism evaluation?
I would say they're just seeing signs. They can tell them what signs they're seeing, but when they actually meet with a provider to give them, if they can record their child, that's awesome. I love it when parents bring in recordings of stemming or recordings of things they have concerns about, sensory stuff, because that helps me see hands-on. But that can't be part of the ADOS. Like the ADOS diagnosis protocol is right then and there. It has to be in front of you. The behaviors, you have to see those. But in forming our diagnosis, we consider information from the parents as well, or things that we're observing during the intake and our interactions with the child informally, to see some of these behaviors we're trying to pull out of them, especially with young ones that are scared. So they got to have their parent in there, and sometimes they're going to lean towards their parent instead of you, but those are still things that are informational for you.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Anything, and I really appreciate your time, anything that you kind of want to leave families with that you think would be helpful for them to know, especially for those families who are kind of seeing some signs and maybe considering going through the evaluation process?
I would say it's better to be safe than sorry. Like, you may as well seek some a consultation with a professional and just even get some guidance or some advice to see if what you're seeing warrants concerns, or if they feel like maybe wait a few months or to 6 months to see if all those things stay consistent and happen frequently that they're observing, because there's a lot of things that children just do and early on that people put in the autism basket, but the difference is how often do they do it and for how long, and is it like an obsession? there's a difference.
Mm-hmm. And like, does it interfere with other things that kids should enjoy doing?
Well, it can, because, for example, toddlers will, like if they have blocks, they can fill a bucket with the blocks, pour it out. Fill the bucket with the blocks, pour it out, over and over and over, and they never get bored. So that's different. Another child will be like, yeah, I'm done. I'm moving on.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Paula, you're so generous with your time. Thank you so much for joining us and really like kicking off our new podcast. We're really excited about it, and hopefully we're able to help a lot of families. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, I'll be sending more your way.
Can't wait.
All right.
What prompted you to pursue an autism diagnosis for Trent?
So we had him in an early intervention program, and we had our daughter in the same early intervention program. And they had said with my daughter several times that she had indicators for autism. They wouldn't say, that it was autism. And I never felt, she had a speech delay, and I never felt with her that was the case. So when they started saying it about Trip at the same time, I thought, well, that fits more than with my daughter. And so we started pursuing it because he was just not improving. He was not getting speech. He was not talking. He acted a lot of the time like we were pieces of furniture in the room. He would not come and interact with us. He just kind of hung out and could care less if we were in the room. And for a long time, my daughter is very much about attention, and she had always been everybody's, center of attention. And she demanded that. And so at first, we just thought it was because she wasn't allowing him to get attention. But when we started to kind of pay more attention and be really cognizant of the way that we were interacting with him, it didn't change. And so that's kind of why we started heading in that direction.
We're so lucky to have Paula as a first guest. At the end of each episode, we're going to be going through a couple different takeaways from each of our experts. So with Paula, I really appreciated that she mentioned every child with autism or autism characteristics is different. It's not just about the eye contact or a singular trait. It's about the characteristics that could indicate someone might benefit from an autism evaluation. And most of the time, these characteristics present at about age 2, but again, everyone's different. The coolest takeaway from my perspective is this: good on the autistic community. They've done so much work to advocate for support, and they've just worked tirelessly to eliminate the stigma that comes with an autism diagnosis. And that is a hard-working group of people. So major kudos to them. I couldn't agree with Paula more on that. Do you have questions for Paula? Send them over to us at autismnavigationpod@outlook.com.